Alright guys, the topic of today's video, does the Digimon TCG need a mulligan? No, it does not. What the f***? I'm joking, of course. Well, kind of. This is the topic that keeps coming up in the Digimon community over the past few months. If you're watching this video, I assume you already know what a mulligan is, but if you don't, a mulligan is a term in card games used for redrawing your opening hand. For example, in Digimon, you start the game off with both players drawing 5 cards. And if you want a mulligan, you'll take a look at your 5 cards and you'll think, do I want to keep these 5 cards and play out the rest of the game with them, or do I want to shuffle them into my deck and then redraw an additional 5? That's a mulligan. Seems all nice and dandy, right? Why doesn't every card game have this? Well, it's not so simple. I guess in order to decide if the Digimon TCG needs a mulligan, we have to first take a look at all the other card games that do have mulligans and see what allows them to have one versus the card games that don't. Before we get started, if you're new here, I'm Levi with the Digi Bros. We make all kind of awesome Digimon TCG related content over here. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, consider subscribing. It's a lot of fun over here. And if that seems like something you're not interested in, subscribe anyway. Funny enough, the term mulligan was actually originated as a golf term, meaning to basically get a re-swing if you had a bad shot. Though in golf, it's not necessarily the first swing. Generally, in a game of golf, you get 1 mulligan or re-swing per every 9 holes. And another fun fact for you, in golf there's actually a term that's the opposite of a mulligan. It's called a Gilligan. It's where you can ask your opponent to re-swing an already successful shot in the hopes that the second shot is worse than the first. That'd be interesting. What if in card games, instead of mulligans, we had Gilligans? Where you could just ask your opponent to shuffle in their already good hand.
I have all 5 pieces of Exodia, and I've declared the victor of this duel Gilligan.
Yeah, maybe not. Alright guys, so let's take a look at some card games with mulligans, and then we'll try to find out why they think they're better than all the other card games. Because they're not. Coming up first, we got Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering has a mulligan in place that states that a player can mulligan their first hand away, but after doing so, they have to take 1 card from their hand and put it on the bottom of their deck, or library, I believe is what they call it in Magic. And they can continue this process until they're either happy with their hand or they run out of cards. But this begs the question, why? Why does Magic the Gathering have a mulligan and Digimon doesn't? Because in order for you to play in a game of Magic, you need to have mana. And how do you get mana, you say? With these cards called lands. And if you don't open up any lands in your opening hand, you're not able to play a single card because you don't have the mana for it. So there's a mulligan in place to keep people from not being able to play the game. Seems simple enough, right? You just mulligan until you get a land, with the downside of you get 1 less card every time you do it. Moving on to the next card game with a mulligan, which is Pokémon TCG. The Pokémon TCG is similar to Magic in the fact that they both require you to have a certain type of card in your opening hand in order for you to play the game. In Magic, it's lands. In Pokémon, it's a basic Pokémon. If you draw your hand without a basic Pokémon, you declare a mulligan, show your hand to your opponent, reshuffle your hand to the deck, then draw a new one and see if you have a basic Pokémon. The downside in the Pokémon TCG is the fact that every time you mulligan, your opponent has the choice to draw an additional card for every time you mulligan. There are several other card games that offer mulligans to their players, like Dragon Ball Super, which allows its players to shuffle any number of cards from their hand into the deck with no penalty at all. But then you got other games like Hearthstone, which uses a partial mulligan system, in which you can discard the cards you don't want in your opening hand and then redraw the same amount. That would be absolutely insane in Yu-Gi-Oh! I can just imagine Burning Abyss just winning before the opening hand. But then you have card games like LCG Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn. I've never actually heard of this card game, I found it on Google. But they have what's called a first 5 rule, in which you get to choose the first 5 cards in your hand. Just imagine if other card games allowed their players to pick the first 5 cards in their hand.
Alright, I'm going to go in and choose the 5 pieces of Exodia. I'm declared the victor of this duel.
Dang it, I already used my Gilligan! So now that we've taken a look at a few card games with mulligans, let's try to take a deeper look at them and see what most of them have in common. The very first one being that some card games require you to have a certain type of card in your opening hand in order to play the game. The second thing they have in common is that most card games with mulligans punish the player for doing the mulligan, whether that be your opponent drawing additional cards or you drawing less. Okay, so with the logic behind some of the other card games having a mulligan being that you need a certain type of card in order to play the game, let's take a look at Digimon. And that's when we realize that Digimon doesn't actually require you to have a certain type of card in your opening hand in order to play the game. I mean, yeah, being able to have a rookie in your opening hand in order to evolve on top of your egg every turn is nice and great draw power for the game, but it's not necessary. Heck, there are some decks that don't run any rookies at all. And with the memory gauge system, you have the capability to play any card in your hand that's a 10 drop or lower turn 1. And yeah, I know it is possible for your opening hand to be nothing but 11 drops or higher, but it's not that likely. What the f***? And if it does happen, more often than not, it's not the card game's fault. It's more your fault for building your deck in such a way. And I know it's not ideal to just give your opponent a ton of memory turn 1 by dropping a level 5 or higher Digimon, but sometimes that's just what you have to do. But we just kind of have to take this into consideration when it comes to building our decks and maybe try to incorporate more rookies. I know when we first started playing the Digimon TCG, we used to only play 11 or 12 rookies in all our decks. Sometimes less. But now when it comes to building decks, we try to incorporate at least 16 rookies into our deck. Sometimes more, sometimes less, just depending on what we're playing. But even then we try to also have some lower drop level 4 Digimon. It's all about just trying not to put ourselves in the situation in which we need a mulligan. I guess what I'm saying is we're always going to have bad hands. We're all going to play level 6 or sometimes higher Digimon. And we got to work on the way we build our decks in order to make it where that's not a hindrance to us. We got to be able to play an appropriate amount of rookies, an appropriate amount of champions, so that way we don't draw hands that are just completely unplayable. But with all that being said, let's take a moment and think about what if the Digimon TCG did have a mulligan? What would that look like? What would the drawback be? Would your opponent maybe gain an additional security for every time you mulligan? Draw an extra card? Start the turn with an extra memory? Let me know down below what you think would be if the Digimon TCG had a mulligan. So I guess in conclusion, no. I don't think we should have a mulligan in the Digimon TCG. There's no certain types of card we're required to have in our opening hand, and I feel as long as we build our decks appropriately, we shouldn't have too many issues opening up unplayable hands. What the f***?